Hello, and welcome to the webinar. This informational webinar is intended for people who are either already have an existing financial assistance agreement with the Office of Indian Energy, those of you who were selected for negotiation of award under Funding Opportunity Announcement, or FOA DE-FOA-0002168, and for those of you interested in applying to the Department of Energy's Office of Indian Energy's currently open FOA DE-FOA 0002317, and specifically for those interested in submitting a request for a reduction in the cost share from the statutory minimum requirement of 50% of total project costs. My name is Lizana Pierce, and I'm a senior engineer with the Department of Energy and the deployment supervisor for the Office of Indian Energy's Policy and Programs, otherwise known simply as the Office of Indian Energy. By way of introduction, I've been working in clean energy for the last 25 years plus, and specifically in Indian Energy since the late 1990s. Under the Office of Indian Energy, I am tasked with implementing the deployment program. Specifically for financial assistance, that entails issuing funding opportunity announcements, managing the application review process, administering some of the resultant grants, and overseeing the funded tribal energy projects. So as you know, we will not be addressing any elements of the funding opportunity announcement other than cost share as part of this webinar, since a webinar on the FOA itself was held April 7th. And those slides and a recording of that webinar is available on the Office of Indian Energy's website at www.energy.gov/Indian Energy. The slides and recording of this webinar will be posted on the Office of Indian Energy's website, specifically on the Cost Share Reduction Request Process webpage. No questions are being entertained as part of this webinar as it is only being recorded. However, questions will be answered if submitted in writing to tribalgrants@hq.doe.gov, and you can see that in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. This process will ensure you receive a formal response to your questions, and any others who have similar questions will receive the benefit of that same response. Next slide, please. As many of you know from the Office's funding opportunity announcements, per statute, there is a minimum 50% cost share requirement, meaning the 50% of the total allowable cost of the project must be provided as cost share. The total cost of the project is the sum of the DOE share as well as the recipient cost share. For instance, if a proposed project is estimated to cost a total of $500,000, that's the total project cost. The required cost share would be $250,000, or 50% of the total project cost of $500,000. Next slide, please. So minimum cost share requirements for grants issued by the Office of Indian Energy are governed by Section 988 of the Energy Policy Act of 2005 and the Department's Financial Assistance Regulations. Specifically, Section 988 of EPACT 2005 sets forth the statutory cost share requirements for research, development, demonstration, and commercial application programs or activities authorized by that act and subsequent legislation. Per Section 988C1, the Secretary shall require no less than 50% of the cost of a demonstration or commercial application activity to be provided by non-federal cost share from a non-federal source, Deployment of energy technology grants resulting from the Office of Indian Energy's funding opportunity announcement, either DE-FOA 0002168, which is closed, or the currently open FOA DE-FOA 0002317, would both be considered commercial application activities and therefore require not less than 50% non-federal cost share. However, Section 988C2 authorizes the Secretary or his designee to reduce, but not to eliminate, the non-federal cost share requirement for a demonstration or commercial application activity. If the Secretary determines that the reduction is necessary and appropriate, considering any technological risk relating to that activity. Next slide, please. On October 30th, the U.S. Department of Energy Office of Indian Energy announced a formalized process for Indian tribes and eligible tribal entities to request cost share reductions under the Energy Policy Act of 2005, otherwise known as EPACT 2005. As authorized under Section 988C2 of EPACT 2005, the non-federal cost share requirement may be reduced if determined to be necessary and appropriate. Native nations' economies have been severely impacted by COVID-19 pandemic, said Deputy Secretary Menzies. He went on to say, as some of the most vulnerable communities in the United States, this pandemic has limited their ability to meet the minimum cost share requirements of EPACT 2005. Our hope is that this formalized and expedited cost share reduction process, will provide some relief to those Native communities currently struggling with the financial impacts of COVID-19. The Office of Indian Energy Director Kevin R. Frost stated, "The Office of Indian Energy stands ready to facilitate relief through this new process for the Native communities who are struggling as a result of the pandemic." He goes on to say, "Providing assistance to tribal communities is the mission of this office, whether that is helping invest in energy technologies or work through financial challenges to meet their energy needs. The Department's Office of Indian Energy is here to support tribes." Next slide, please. Information on the process of how eligible entities can request a reduction in cost share is posted on the Office of Indian Energy website at www.energy.gov/Indian Energy. You can access that by clicking on the text in the picture of Deputy Secretary Menzies shown. If you click on the text as shown by the arrow on the slide, or by using the top navigation, clicking on projects at the far right of the top navigation, and then clicking cost share reduction request process as shown. Again, these webinar slides and recording will also be posted on the cost share reduction request process page on the website. Next slide, please. In addition to a link to the press release and a letter from Energy Deputy Secretary Menzies, the cost share reduction request process webpage includes the statutory cost share requirements, which we discussed previously, along with the authority for the Secretary or his designee to reduce but not eliminate non-federal cost share. The page also includes eligibility, who is eligible to request the cost share reduction, and the basis for the cost share reduction decision, and deadline and submittal instructions, which we'll discuss on subsequent slides. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start with eligibility. Eligibility to request a reduction, but not to eliminate, the non-federal cost share requirement is limited to eligible open obligations. In other words, those who currently have an active financial assistance agreement with the Office of Indian Energy, each of whom have been sent a letter with instructions and provided the cost share reduction request form for requesting a reduction in cost share. And more on that eligibility on a subsequent slide. Also eligible are obligations made under applications previously selected for negotiation of award under the Office of Indian Energy's Funding Opportunity Announcement, DEFOA 0002168. In other words, those of you who were selected for negotiation of award under that FOA, each of each of whom have also been sent a letter with instructions and the cost share reduction request form to use in requesting a reduction in cost share. Lastly, obligations made for awards resulting from the currently open FOA DE FOA 0002317. In other words, those of you who may apply under the current open funding opportunity announcements. For those potential applicants, the cost share reduction form is posted on the Office of Indian Energy website. Note that even if you are submitted a request for reduction request for an existing award through the Office of Indian Energy, or if you are submitted a request for the award currently being negotiated, you may also submit a separate cost share reduction request for a project you plan to submit under the currently open funding opportunity announcement, the FOA 0002317. Additionally, if you're planning to submit multiple applications to the currently open FOA, you will need to submit a separate cost share reduction request for each of those projects you plan to propose. And if you happen to have multiple awards with the Office of Indian Energy, a cost share reduction request will need to be submitted for each of those awards. Again, I'll remind you that if you do have questions, please submit those in writing to tribalgrants@hq.doe.gov. Next slide, please. For open obligations, in other words, those who currently have an active financial assistance agreement with DOE's Office of Indian Energy, there are some additional eligibility requirements, including only remaining costs not invoiced for reimbursement as of March 1st, 2020, the effective date the President declared the national emergency due to COVID-19, will be considered for reduction in non-federal cost share. And more on this on subsequent slides. For eligible open obligations where the remaining cost share amount not invoiced for as of the effective date of March 1st is less than $10,000 will not be considered for cost share reduction due to the amount of resources needed to process and execute a cost share reduction, and because those open obligations are nearing completion. Remember, those with eligible open obligations were notified directly and provided instructions and the cost share reduction form to be used for requesting a cost share reduction. Also, cost share reductions for any obligations selected under a FOA with a closing date prior to September 30, 2015 will not be considered. So even though we are going through these eligibility requirements now, remember that only those with eligible open obligations, those who meet these eligibility requirements, were notified directly and provided those instructions in the cost share reduction request form for requesting a reduction in cost share. Next slide, please. Next, onto the deadline and submittal instructions. The cost share reduction request will be accepted within the next 30 days from the date of the release, or accepted up until but no later than December 3rd, 2020. And those cost share reduction requests will be reviewed in the order received. As covered, recipients of eligible open obligations, again, active financial assistance agreements, and those with applications previously selected for negotiation of award under the Office of Indian Energy FOA DE FOA 0002168 should have already received a letter with instructions for requesting a reduction in cost share. For those considering applying or have already submitted an application to the currently open FOA DE FOA 0002317 and are interested in a cost share reduction, you will need to complete the cost share reduction request template submitted to tribalgrants@hq.doe.gov and include the following subject line: cost share request for DE FOA 0002317 and then include your the applicant's name. For potential applicants to the currently open FOA, the cost share reduction request template can be downloaded from the cost share reduction request process page on the Office of Indian Energy's website. And again, that's www.energy.gov/Indian Energy. Next slide, please. So before we get into the basis for cost share reduction decision and the form and those instructions, I wanted to address how cost share is calculated for both those with active financial assistance agreements and for those with pending or potential awards, as it will be important in completing your cost share reduction request. As per Appendix B of all Office of Indian Energy funding opportunity announcements, the term cost sharing and cost matching are often used synonymously. Even the DOE financial assistance regulations, which are 2 CFR 910-130, use both of the terms in these titles specific to regulations applicable to cost sharing. However, DOE almost always uses the term cost sharing, as it conveys the concept that the non-federal cost share is calculated as a percentage of the total project costs, as was shown in the previous example. So next we're going to go on to some examples. Next slide, please. Oh, you already beat me to it. Thank you. Using the previous example, if a proposed project is estimated to cost $500,000, the required cost share would be $250,000, using the 50% of total project cost of $500,000, or a 50% cost share. As shown, to obtain the non-federal cost share in dollars, one would multiply the cost share percentage, in this example 50%, which for multiplication purposes is 0.5, and the total project cost, $500,000 in this example, to calculate the non-federal cost share amount in dollars, which equals, again in this example, $250,000. Conversely, to calculate the amount of non-federal cost share as a percentage, the amount of non-federal cost share, $250,000 in this example, would be divided by the total project cost of $500,000. To calculate the non-federal cost share as a percentage, which in this example equates to 50%. You may also, again, refer to Appendix B of any of the Office of Indian Energy funding opportunity announcements for additional information on how to calculate cost share. Next slide, please. This example would apply if, for instance, an Indian tribe or eligible tribal entity were to request a reduction in federal cost share from 50 to 30% for a proposed project. This example applies to those of you who were selected for negotiation of award under DEFOA 0002168, and those of you which may apply under funding opportunity announcement DEFOA 0002317. We will get to more on calculating cost share reduction for existing financial assistance awards shortly. For those who do not have a current award, in this example, we're going to use the total project cost of $2 million. If cost share was calculated at the minimum required cost share of 50%, using 0.5 for the calculation, the cost share amount would equate to $1 million, as shown on the slide. If, as an example only, a request to reduce the cost share from 50% to 30% for a project with total project cost of $2 million, the cost share request would reduce the cost share from $1 million to $600,000. And if the cost share request was approved, would reduce the cost share by $400,000. Remember, cost share can only be reduced, not eliminated in its entirety. However, the particular percentage of reduced cost share you choose to request is solely at your discretion. Again, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please submit those in writing to tribalgrants@hq.doe.gov. Next slide, please. So this example would apply if, for instance, an Indian tribe or eligible tribal entity were to request a reduction in non-federal cost share from 50 to 30% for a proposed project. Again, this example applies to those who were selected but have not received an award, or those who are interested in applying to the currently open funding opportunity announcement. And I'm sorry, we went over that slide. Okay, I apologize. So this slide and the next couple of slides are specific to the eligible open obligation. In other words, those who currently have an active financial assistance agreement with the Office of Indian Energy. Note that if you currently have an active financial assistance agreement with the office, but had not invoiced for any funds as of March 1st, the prior example applies. So as was previously addressed, for eligible open obligations, only remaining costs not invoiced for reimbursement as of March 1st, the effective date of the President's declared a national emergency due to COVID-19, will be considered for reduction in non-federal cost share. As such, if you have previously invoiced for reimbursement and reflected costs contributions on those invoices, the calculations are not as straightforward. As such, the first step would be to determine the amount of costs, and specifically the amount of cost share that had not been invoiced for reimbursement as of March 1st. Once the amount of cost share not invoiced for as of March 1st is known, you can decide how much of the remaining cost share funds you'd like to request be reduced, or in certain instances, eliminated. Remember, cost share cannot be eliminated in its entirety. However, if you've already contributed a portion of the cost share, you may be able to request the amount of cost share remaining to be contributed as of March 1st to be reduced to zero. Next slide, please. So the third step is to calculate the cost share percentage being requested, and the fourth step is to calculate the revised cost share percentage, or the percent of total project costs. And we'll next go over an example of each of these steps. Next slide, please. In this example, which is only applicable to eligible open applications, those who currently have an active financial assistance agreement with the Office of Indian Energy, let's assume again that the total project costs are $2 million and that the currently approved cost share is 50%, or $1 million, as was shown in the previous example. As was previously addressed, eligible open obligations, for eligible open obligations, only remaining costs not invoiced as of March 1st will be considered for reduction in non-federal cost share. Again, these calculations are not straightforward. As was discussed in the first step would be to determine the amount of cost share that had not been invoiced as of March 1st, 2020. For this example, let's assume that a total of $500,000 in costs had been invoiced. At 50% cost share, that would mean $250,000 of those costs reimbursed by DOE, and $250,000 contributed as cost share. Based on this example, since $250,000 of the $1 million in cost share had been invoiced as of March 1st, only $750,000 of the cost share remained as of March 1st, 2020, and is eligible to be reduced. Next slide, please. So again, in this example, as a reminder, the total project costs are $2 million, and the approved cost share is 50%, or $1 million. $250,000 in cost share has been invoiced for as of March 1st, 2020. Therefore, only $750,000 of the currently approved cost share remains. and can be considered for reduction. In this example, the maximum amount of cost share that would be eligible would be $750,000. For example purposes, let's assume the recipient decided to request the cost share be reduced by $400,000, making the remaining cost share to be committed if the requested cost share reduction is approved, $350,000. Next slide, please. Pardon me. So the third step is to calculate the amount of revised total amount of cost share being requested. In this example, $250,000 in cost share has been invoiced for as of March 1st, 2020. The recipient decided to request a remaining cost share of $750,000 be reduced by $400,000. And again, so the remaining cost share to be committed, if the request is approved, is $350,000. The sum of the cost share invoiced, $250,000, plus the remaining cost share, if the cost share reduction is approved, $350,000, equals the total amount of cost share being requested, which equates to $600,000. Next slide, please. So to summarize, again, in this example, $250,000 in cost share has been invoiced as of March 1st. The recipient decided to request the remaining cost share of $750,000 be reduced by $400,000. So the remaining cost share to be committed, if approved, is $350,000. Therefore, the total amount of cost share being requested is $600,000. Again, the sum of the cost share invoice, $250,000, and the remaining cost share, if approved, $350,000. The fourth step is to calculate the revised cost share percentage being requested. To calculate the revised cost share being requested as a percentage, divide the total amount of cost share being requested, the $600,000, by the total project cost of $2 million, and that will equal the revised cost share percentage being requested, which in this example is 0.3 or 30%. So hopefully these examples will help you in calculating cost share. As a reminder, cost share cannot be eliminated in its entirety. However, if you've already contributed a portion of cost share, you may be able to request the amount of cost share remaining to be contributed as of the March 1st date be reduced to zero. Next slide, please. So once you've determined the reduced amount of total cost share being requested, dollars and percentage, let's move on to the cost share reduction request form and instructions. Just to summarize, those of you who currently have an active financial assistance agreement with the DOE's Office of Indian Energy, referred to as an eligible open obligation, and who are eligible, which we previously covered, were sent a letter with instructions and the cost share reduction form for requesting a reduction in cost share. Those of you who were selected for negotiation of award under FOA DEFOA 000-2168 were also sent a letter with instructions and cost share reduction request form for making that request. For those of you who may apply under our currently open funding opportunity announcement, DEFOA 000-2317, the cost share reduction request form for requesting a reduction in cost share is on the Office of Indian Energy website at www.energy.gov/Indian Energy. The forms in all three cases are similar, with slight differences to obtain agreement numbers and address any cost share invoice prior to March 1st, 2020. So the cost share reduction request template includes a summary of the reasons for offering the cost share reduction, the basis for cost share reduction decisions, instructions for determining factors, and the cost share reduction request form. Remember, however, if there are other factors besides the 3 identified that you would like DOE to consider, you will need to provide a supplemental letter as an attachment, which includes that rationale for considering those other factors. That supplemental letter must be on the requesting Indian tribe or eligible tribal entity's letterhead and signed by an authorized representative of the requesting entity. And please include this letter as an attachment to the completed and certified cost share reduction request form. Also be aware that an authorized representative must certify that all the information provided on the cost share reduction form is accurate and that that representative has the authority to certify the information on behalf of the requester. Once the form itself has been completed and certified, a supplemental letter completed and attached, if you'd like other factors considered, you'll need to submit that to tribalgrants@hq.doe.gov. Tribalgrants@hq.doe.gov is also where you would send any questions you may have. Next slide, please. So, basis for cost share reduction decision. Consistent with the Secretary's and Deputy Secretary's direction to find ways to provide assistance within our statutory authority to alleviate the financial impact of COVID-19, considerations for determining a reduction to be necessary and appropriate may include the requester's need for cost share reduction based on factors including but not limited to energy costs, current unemployment rate, loss of revenue due to COVID-19, and other factors. We'll go over each of these factors in more detail on subsequent slides. Please note that the use of the cost share reduction request form is not required. However, it is recommended. If Indian tribes or eligible tribal entities so choose, they can submit a letter addressing the information included in the cost share reduction request form. And using the form is up to each requesting Indian tribe or eligible tribal entity to decide, as well as which factors to include. The time required to complete the cost share reduction request form is estimated to take between 60 to 120 minutes, depending on how many factors are used, and that excludes the required certification time. It may also take longer if other factors and a supplemental letter are being submitted for consideration. These times are only estimates, and the actual time to complete will largely depend on the availability of the information. Next slide, please. As stated, requesters have the discretion on which and how many factors to submit to DOE for consideration. We will go over each. The first factor is energy costs. Energy costs are defined as the current price of electricity for the requesting Indian tribe or eligible tribal entity using the best currently available tribal data. This energy cost is as compared to the average price of electricity in your state using DOE's Energy Information Administration EIA Table 56A average price of electricity residential rates as of July 2020. The Office of Indian Energy will complete that comparison between the requester's residential price of electricity and the average price of electricity in your state using the DOE's Energy Information Administration's information. As such, you will only need to provide your current residential price of electricity using step 1 of the instructions. So per the instructions, you would provide the tribal community's current residential price of electricity in cents per kilowatt hour. For example, it would be 0.135 or 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour, using the best currently available tribal data, and record that information under question 1 of the cost share reduction request form. Remember, this is only the residential price of electricity, not commercial or industrial rates. That rate can generally be found on electricity bills or obtained directly from your utility. If you do have multiple utilities serving a particular tribal community where the proposed project is located, or the actual project site for those current awardees, you may need to average the rates from each of those utilities serving that community. Also, if your proposed project includes sites in multiple tribal communities, you will need to provide a separate electricity price for each tribal community and record data for each on the cost share reduction request form. Again, just a reminder that if you do have questions, please submit those to tribalgrants@hq.doe.gov. Next slide, please. The second factor is unemployment rate, if you choose to have DOE consider that factor. Specifically, the current unemployment rate of requesting Indian tribe or eligible tribal entity using the best currently available data as compared to the unemployment rate in your state using the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics State Unemployment Summary, Table B, and rates as of July 2020. Under Step 2, you would provide the tribal community's unemployment rate as a percentage, again using the best currently available tribal data, and record that under question 2 of the cost share reduction request form. The unemployment rate as a percentage would be the number of people unemployed divided by the total number of people who could be employed. Generally, the total population is not used, only those who could be employed. For instance, the U.S. Census calculates unemployment using only people within a community who are 16 years of age or older. So if your proposed project, if your proposed project includes sites in multiple tribal communities, you will need to provide a separate unemployment rate for each of those tribal communities and record that data on the cost share reduction request form. Next slide. So the third factor, which could be considered, is the loss of revenue due to COVID-19 as compared to the same quarter the previous year, based on the best available tribal data. Pardon me. Per the instructions, the loss of revenue due to COVID-19 as compared to the same quarter the previous year is an estimate of the amount of funds lost due to COVID from revenue-generating operations. And that dollar amount should be included under question 3 of the cost share reduction request form. If the requesting tribe does not have any revenue-generating operations, you need to provide a statement to that effect under question 3. Note that you will be asked to describe the source of the data, and the requesting tribe or tribal entity's authorized representative must certify to that loss of revenue due to COVID-19 as compared to the same quarter the previous year, and attest to the accuracy of the information on the cost share reduction form. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the fourth factor are any other factors the requester wishes DOE to consider in making a determination. Specifically, other factors are those to be outlined by the requester and accompanied by an appropriate supporting documentation and evidence that demonstrates a reduction would be necessary and appropriate, including the implications of a requested reduction is not received. Under step 4, other factors for consideration, you will need to identify any other factors you would like DOE to consider in determining whether the cost share reduction is necessary and appropriate, and as said, including the implications if a requested reduction is not received. You would list those factors under question 4 on the cost share reduction request form and include rationale for considering those other factors in a supplemental letter. Step 5 is to provide rationale for those other factors as we discussed under step 4, specifically by providing the supplemental letter as an attachment, which includes that rationale for considering those factors identified under step 4. That letter must be on the requesting Indian tribe or eligible tribal entity's letterhead and signed by an authorized representative of the requesting entity. And that letter would be an attachment to the completed certified cost share reduction request form. Next slide, please. The 6th and final step is certification. To complete the cost share reduction request form, have an authorized representative certify to the information by signing the completed cost share reduction request form. Attach the supplemental letter from step 5, if applicable, and submit to tribalgrants@hq.doe.gov. By signing, that certified representative is attesting that all the information provided on the cost share reduction request form is accurate and that that person has the authority to certify the information on behalf of the requesting entity. And again, remember, any questions can be submitted to tribalgrants@hq.doe.gov. So again, as stated by the Deputy Secretary, our hope is that this formalized and expedited cost share reduction process will provide some relief to those Native communities currently struggling with financial impacts of COVID-19. And as per Director Frost, the Office of Indian Energy stands ready to facilitate relief through this new process. And the Department's Office of Indian Energy is here to support tribes. Thank you for your interest and your attention. Our hope is that you found this webinar useful. However, if you have any questions, please send them to tribalgrants@hq.doe.gov. As well, this is where your completed cost share reduction form and supplemental letter, if you choose to submit one, would be submitted to tribalgrants@hq.doe.gov as well. Please remember that the cost share reduction requests will be accepted at any time and are due no later than December 3rd, and those requests will be reviewed in the order received. In other words, on a first-come, first-served basis. So it may be advantageous to submit your request sooner rather than later. Next slide, please. Again, thank you for your time and attention. Hopefully this webinar has provided some useful information. This concludes our webinar. Goodbye.